Linguistics and Translation from CADS, University of Hyderabad. Dr. Khan has about 12 books to his credit in the area of language teaching, translation, etc., and about 24 research papers, which is internationally published. And he's holding he works in CIL Mysore. He's holding many positions, some of which are like he's an academic secretary of the institute. He's also holding the position of officer in charge of National Translation Mission India, which is a major scheme of the MHRD, which is now called Education Ministry. And apart from, he is also principal of two very important centers of NRLC Patiala and UTRC Solan. And I think that's all. I would be sharing you the detailed CV of Dr. Tariq Khan and also the link to his website so that you can know more about his research work and area of interest. And I'm sure that you are going to enjoy this talk a lot. I have been to a lot of his talks. His talks are very easy to understand, and for the participants and for the scholars alike. So this is what the beauty of Dr. Tariq Khan's lecture. Sir, a very welcome to the I extend a warm welcome to you in this program. And now over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj Dwivedi. Dear participants, observers, and organizers, it's my pleasure to be part of this program. And I should like to begin by thanking Dr. Pankaj Dwivedi and National Testing Service India for giving me an opportunity to interact with you and discuss some of the issues that are very close to my heart. And it was a very generous introduction in which Dr. Pankaj has mentioned that I am affiliated with applied linguistics. And before we begin, let me draw your attention to the fact that the subject called applied linguistics has its roots in language teaching. So for a very long time, in fact for decades, applied linguistics was synonymous with language teaching. And even today, a number of teachers would call applied linguistics in place of language teaching, or say language teaching in place of applied linguistics. For many, even today, applied linguistics means language teaching. So today, I am very pleased and I find it my distinct pleasure to interact with you and discuss with you some of the things that I find relevant in the context of language teaching. But before we begin, I would like to repeat the topic that was assigned to me. The topic was language teaching methods and techniques. And before we move on to the topic per se, I would also like to draw your attention to some of the key factors that govern any discussion that happens in these areas. So I seek to start a presentation with which I would like to develop an understanding with you. I hope my slides are visible. Can the organizers confirm that the slides are visible?
No, sir, not yet. Not yet, sir.
Visible.
Yeah,
it is visible, sir.
Thank you for confirming. Let me begin now. And a very important point that you might agree with me is that language is something that defines us. We all are so because of the language that we have, and it makes us distinct from animals. It makes us distinct from various other organisms in the world. And let me draw some distinctions about language. Let me tell you that it is a very distinct thing. But before that, let us just also recall what definitions we have about language. So if you just try to recall how you have been defined, how you have been told, how your your schools and your classrooms have told something about languages. So one very typical and template-like definition comes about language is a medium of communication. So one very common definition that emerges about language is that language is a medium of communication, and all of us are aware of it. Everyone has at least gone through it. But then there are several other definitions also that we might need to take into consideration and then move the discussion forward today. One definition about language is it's a rule operated behavior. Notice the word behavior. It's a rule operated or rule governed behavior. Then there are others who have defined language as language is the mirror of mind. Mirror of mind. So what we notice is there are, like, we took into consideration three definitions. One is language is a medium of communication. The other one is it's a rule operated behavior, and the third one is it's a mirror of mind. We can take into consideration one more definition. It's called language is a set of all and possible or all and only grammatical sentences. Now you notice that the four definitions that I have presented before you are focusing on some aspects, and based on that we can say that this definition has emerged from a certain line of thought. So when we say language is a medium of communication, probably the communicative role of language has taken a front seat. When we say language is a rule operated behavior, probably the psychological aspects and behavior has become important in this definition. Similarly, when we say it's a mirror of mind, probably the cognitive aspects have taken over. And then when we say it's a set of grammatical and only grammatical sentences, it's also a formal definition, of a formal set theory-based definition. So what we notice is language has been defined in different ways. That means people have thought about it for a very long time. The point I wanted to make is language has been in the thought of human beings for a very long time, and they have tried to understand it from different angles. And that is why we have different definitions. From time to time, new perspectives emerged, and that is how we have got different definitions. We have got different definitions. Now, what is important for us to understand is human beings are able to speak language. Animals communicate, but human beings are able to communicate by using language. This is a distinction drawn by the work of Charles F. Hockett, who proposed design features. Design features mean the features that make humans unique, and for which he made a set of features. He proposed a set of features and said that these are the features by which humans are distinct. So Hockett says that though animals communicate, they are not using language to communicate. They have communication but no language. And humans use language to communicate, even though communication was possible without language. I would like to draw your attention to this point, that communication was possible for humans even without language. That means language has some other roles too. That means apart from communicating, language has some other roles too. And that role is probably cognition. That means whatsoever we are able to think, whatsoever we have become, whatsoever we are capable of, it is actually the product of language. I do not know how much of it is going to stay, how much of it is very true. But then yes, these are the ideas that command today's thinking on language. So language is for communication as well as cognition. I hope these 2 points are clear to you, that we perform 2 roles with language. That means we communicate using language, and we also think by using language, and our thoughts are guided, or they're shaped by the language that we use. Now let me draw your attention to another very important point, that is about the human beings. If you notice, the animals or birds or other species, in their case the communication is not to be, or say there is very little to be taught to the younger ones. So the younger members of the species are able to pick the communicative skills comfortably. In case of humans, it is slightly different. So we need to take into consideration how human child develops language, or how language develops in a human child. This is something that has intrigued the scientists and researchers for a very long time. What is so intriguing here? What is so interesting? That human children are able to pick language very quickly. They are able to learn or acquire language very fast. In case of adults, it's a bit slow. And that is what surprises the scientists, the researchers. What they've also observed is the first language is learned at relatively very less effort and very naturally. And how is that happening? So before 1950s, there were assumptions. There were several assumptions. Some people thought that language is already there. Some people thought that no, it is learned after the child is born. Now there are like two contrasting views. One says it develops after the birth, and it depends on the surrounding. It depends on how the child imitates, how the reinforcement takes place, and it also depends on rewards and punishments. Whereas the other group said, no, it's already there and it just gets switched on. So that means the environment, the surrounding only switches on something which is already present there. So these are two contrasting views. So B.F. Skinner, psychologist by profession, proposed something called verbal behavior. And he said that the children are able to learn, or say they are able to speak language, they are able to use language very fast because there is imitation. The children are able to imitate, then the adult members, then they are also able to learn fast, or they are able to master the language fast because they receive reinforcement constantly, and then there are rewards from the adult caregivers. Chomsky contradicted him, and he said that no, if that were true, notice this point, if that were true, then children would be speaking very incorrectly, because adult members talk to children in a distorted language. That means all children should have grown up with distorted language, and that does not happen. So Chomsky said that the quantity of learning that is happening there is not possible in that short time space if there were no other support mechanisms. So there were like two contrasting views, and that the debate did not settle till mid 1960s, where a kind of a midway path. Chomsky said that there is poverty of stimulus. That means the reinforcement or imitation or rewards, all that is very small in comparison to the amount of development that is happening. So other scientists said that the quantity of input is also not that small, not that distorted, and also that it is not fully based on imitation or reinforcement or rewards. So there is a kind of a midway path that is to be followed. Let me draw your attention to two important concepts which are very, very important in case of any language classroom. These concepts are acquisition and learning. It's a distinction developed by Krashen. According to this distinction, acquisition happens when there is no formal training. That means all of us learned, or say the first language, we mastered the first language by acquisition. That means we acquired it. Whereas learning, the term learning is used for such situations where or such phenomena when there is formal training, there is conscious effort. So in our cases, so I can very confidently say that the participants speaking Malayalam have acquired Malayalam because they did not learn it formally by going in to schools. Rather, they developed or they grew up with this language at their home. So in their home environment itself, they acquired it. Learning is related to formal teaching learning situation in a classroom. There is more effort. There are conscious efforts. So it is also possible that you acquired the language and then further grew skills in that by formal training. It is said that in most cases, the first language is acquired, the second, third languages are learned. A very general term that is used in these contexts is called language pedagogy, and that involves teaching, learning, evaluation, assessment, all sorts of things. And in this context, we need to take into consideration approaches, methods, and techniques. And today's main discussion is on language teaching methods. I shall be coming to that in a short while, but before that, let me draw your attention to a few more points. I assume that most of you are language teachers, or most of you are in the situation when language teaching or training has to happen, or you are all in situations when you can play a role in somebody else's language development, or you might agree with me on the fact that language can play a role in the development of other sciences in the children. So if a child has to learn say social sciences or science disciplines, language can be an enabler, language can play an important role. So in that context, I assume that all of us are language teachers and all of us can play a role in the development of language in children. So for the same, I wish to draw your attention to some points which appear to be very simple, and they are not so simple and they require our attention. One point that is very commonly used is input. So most often you will notice that the syllabus that you use, the techniques that you follow, talk about input, right? And in the classrooms, there is a lot of focus on input, whereas the focus should be on intake. So the difference between input and intake has to be taken into consideration. What you put in the syllabus is input. What children produce, or what children actually, or your learners actually get, is called intake. So the minimum the gap is between input and intake, the better is the performance of the method and technique that you have followed. A similar kind of distinction is between output and outcome. So if the purpose is to make the learners speak a language, the learner can start speaking that. But then outcome, it can become output but not outcome. Outcome is something that you actually intended to grow in the learners. So when the desired result comes in the learners, you say it's an outcome. And if you look at the methods, if you look at the techniques, you can notice that as there are several definitions for language, there are several methods also. There are several methods that are there, several methods are in use, and it may not be possible for us to discuss all of them today in an hour's time. But yes, it is possible for us to classify those methods in two groups and also discuss some of them which are very, very important, or which are very popular, which are very well tested, tried and tested. But then, yes, if we want to classify all the methods, one method is, one group can be teacher-oriented method. That means the teacher decides everything. It is at the convenience of the teacher, and the other can be learner oriented or learner centric. The earlier methods that were popular around the world were teacher oriented methods. They were not learner centric. Whereas in last say 50 years or so, the focus has shifted from teacher oriented methods to learner oriented methods. So in a short while we shall be discussing language teaching learning methods or language teaching methods, and our methods can be classified as teacher oriented methods or learner oriented methods. But before we go into the methods, let us also further examine the aspects, the skills, the levels, and the context in which our language classrooms operate. When you want to teach a language, or when you want to learn a language, what are the things that you wish to master, or that what are the things that you wish your students need to master? The focus is on pronunciation part. That involves phonetics and phonology. That means you wish to make your learners master sound patterns. You also wish to make your learners master word parts and word formation strategies, followed by sentence creation, and then ability to use those sentences appropriately in contexts. So basic levels that you wish your learners to master are the levels of phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and discourse. So the desire is to make the learners able to use language in proper context, in appropriate form, which is like culturally also acceptable. And the skills that have to be mastered are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Why do I have to put this list in this order? There is a reason. Listening precedes speaking. Reading precedes writing. So only when the learner has mastered, or only when the learner has developed the skill of listening, he or she will be able to speak. That means listening precedes speaking. And the same is true for reading. Reading, the ability to read, precedes the ability to write. I also wish to draw your attention to the fact that listening and speaking can be acquired. These skills can be acquired. These skills can be developed even without formal training. But reading and writing, no. They require formal conscious efforts, and they require training. So listening and speaking can develop without training. Reading and writing develop with training. Without training, it is not possible to develop reading and writing skills. Let me also draw your attention to two very popular aspects on which the abilities or the performance of language happens. One is called competence. That means only the ability to use language. That means the knowledge of rules. The other is called performance. That means the application of that knowledge in the usages, in the day-to-day context. So Chomsky made a distinction between competence and performance. He says that we all have competence. That means we are able to understand rules. We have some rules existing in our mind, which is made into use, which is put to use when we are performing language, when we are actually using language. Now at this point, if I ask you, say, a word pen, and I ask you to check, do you know this word pen? And all of you would say, yes, I know the word pen. How do you know? If you are able to say, I know it because I have learned it, or it's a very common word. Yes, but there are other uncommon words for which also you will say very quickly that you know it. And if I speak a sentence which is ungrammatical, you'll be able to identify that. That means your competence in the language is helping you to identify an ungrammatical sentence. And when you put that competence into use, it's called performance. Let me draw your attention to next point, that is called context. And the context of a language classroom as first language, that means you are teaching a learner his or her first language, in which the proficiency is already there. Maybe the learner knows how to speak and understand. So the reading, writing skills have to be taught. The context can be second language, and there it's slightly different. Why it would be called second language? It is called second language because it's a language that is spoken in the surrounding. So in the area, this language is spoken not within the family but in the surrounding. And if a person is mastering that language as a second language, that means there are speakers of that language in that surrounding. Whereas another concept called foreign language, so a foreign language context is when a language is being taught, but for that language there is no speaker around, there is no speaker in the surrounding, there is no speaker in the near vicinity. If we take into consideration the context of Kerala, the language Malayalam is the first language. So the teachers in the classroom will be teaching Malayalam as the first language. Tamil can be a second language, say Kannada can be a second language. To some extent, Telugu can also be a second language, Hindi can be a second language, English can be a second language. But if, say, Portuguese has to be taught or Japanese has to be taught, it would be a foreign language. The reason is very simple. The first language, or say Malayalam, is already there in the context. There is some level of proficiency. Second language is also there because some people, some speakers, some kind of shared vocabulary is there. Whereas foreign language, the context of foreign language comes into play because there are no speakers, there is no person speaking that language in the surrounding, and it is to be taught. So these are the contexts in which our language classrooms operate. The context of first language, the context of second language, the context of foreign language. I brought before you these contexts just to tell you that our methods for teaching a language would be determined by all these factors: the context, the skills, the levels. Let me draw your attention to some guiding factors, the factors that command a language classroom. You'll notice that most methods will have some kind of imitation. That means repeating something as the native speakers speak or as the teacher wants the learners to pronounce. Reinforcement, that means somebody speaks something or writes something, commits an error, and the facilitator or the teacher corrects that, makes changes, or says an alternative form of that, so that the learner understands that it has to be corrected or modified in a certain way. And then there are rewards like appreciation or some kind of tokens or badges which are given to a learner to tell that the way the learner has used a certain technique or a certain form or a certain skill or a certain chapter or a certain point is good, it is appropriate. And these 3 points are compared with innateness. Innateness is something which is already there, it is by nature. So the idea here is that imitation, reinforcement, and reward are things that can cause motivation among the learners, but the learners not just learn because they imitate or reinforce or they receive rewards, or their motivation is only because of these factors. the learners are able to make use of something which is already there in their brain, something which is called innate. All right. So the learners have some abilities already present by which they are able to learn any language. And if you examine this point more carefully, you'll notice that the human beings are able to learn any language, irrespective of where they are, irrespective of what is their mother tongue, irrespective of what their whole surrounding speaks. That is why we have, say, a Malayalam speaker going to the Arab world and learning Arabic, going to America learning English, going to France learning French, going to Japan learning Japanese. And a child who say a Malayalam speaking parents, a Malayalam speaking couple has a child, and the child is able to pick up any language in the surrounding. So this is possible because of innateness. Now let me also make a distinction between the approaches. In a language classroom, or say when you want to study the language teaching methods, a distinction is maintained among three concepts. One is called approaches, the approach, the other is called methods, and the third one is called technique. Now, if we discuss the language teaching methods, you will notice that these distinctions are very blurred. But then Richards and Richards made this distinction to explain few things. One is, like, approaches are the general principles. So approaches are at the level of principles, and they are like general points. They are the main objectives to be achieved, which will govern the methods, and the techniques are precise procedures. So method is like when you are putting the theory into practice, and technique is at the level of actual procedures. Now in the approaches, you'll notice there are two very opposite, diagonally opposite approaches. One is called deductive approach, the other is called inductive approach. A deductive approach is the one in which rules are given in the beginning. That means the learners receive a set of rules and they have to apply those rules while learning, or say observing language. So this was a very popular and a long time technique, or say approach, which was like deductive in nature. So if you can recall some say 15-20 years ago also, when you were growing up, you received some grammar books, some rules, and then you knew the rules before you were able to speak or read or write that language. The inductive approach is different. In the inductive approach, you are exposed to the language and the learner are able to detect, or they are able to notice the patterns, and they make rules for themselves. So it is like from data to theory. The deductive approach is from theory to data. Inductive approach is from data to theory. Before we begin the methods, before we go into individual methods, let us also take into consideration two more concepts, because our context mostly is second language and foreign language teaching. So in these contexts, we know that the children who, or the learners who are coming to us, already have a language, and when they already have a language, they will be using the intuitions from that language. They'll be using the habits of that language, and they will be putting into practice some of the common techniques they know in that language. Even if our context is teaching the first language, there are possibilities of errors, and they need to be analyzed. Like, all children grow by committing errors. All learners commit errors in the initial stages, and these errors are not random. The point that we need to understand is the errors are not random. Rather, there is a pattern in the errors. There is a pattern in the errors, and if we are able to understand these patterns as instructors, as facilitators, will be able to reduce the efforts of the learners, will be able to make tasks simpler for them, for which there is a need to analyze errors, and there is a need to compare or analyze the two languages that we take into consideration. For instance, if say if a school or if a college has an English classroom where the learners already know Malayalam, it would be good for the teacher or the instructor to compare the structure of Malayalam and the structure of English, and then predict some of the errors that might happen and provide solutions to overcome those problems. So that way, the technique of error analysis and the technique of contrastive analysis have proven to be very useful for all the language course instructors. Now the wait is over. Let us take into consideration some popular methods. If you do a small Google search also, you will come across some of these methods. This is not a complete list, but then it has some of the most popular methods of language teaching, language learning. The first method obviously is grammar translation method. The second one is audiolingual method. Both of these follow the structural approach. Then we have communicative language teaching, and we have direct method. We have total physical response. There is something called Suggestopedia. Then we have community language learning. There is something called natural approach. Then there are task-based language learning. There is something called immersion. There are eclectic methods. Then we have computer-assisted language learning. Now this is a broad list of methods, and it's an incomplete list of methods. We can take into consideration some of these methods. I have presented before you a long list, but we will take into consideration some of these and discuss them in details. Let us first take into consideration the grammar translation method. The grammar translation method, or as the name suggests, depends on the structural aspects of the language, and it takes into consideration the grammatical aspects. That means it is a deductive approach to language teaching. And this method has been in practice for a very long time, and it is used for teaching. It's a traditional approach to teach the parent languages. If you notice, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, Pali, all these are taught by taking into consideration the grammatical and the translation aspects. So rules are given. Based on those rules, the usages are learned, techniques are learned, skills are developed. So in this method, a typical lesson consists of the presentation of a grammatical rule. Then a set of vocabulary is also provided, and then there are translation exercises. So it is assumed that by applying rules and by translating, the learners would develop proficiency in the language. This method was in application for a very long time, but it has been criticized. There are reactions to this method, and several scholars have said that it is a teacher-centric approach. This method has a toll on the learners, and this method has created problems for the learners, and proficiency still remains a problem. That means it is not a highly successful method. What it says is, or say it is based on, the criticism is based on the fact that learners go through a lot of stress when they are taught in using this method, and they think in the first language, then they translate that and speak in the second language, and all the time they are evaluating the rules, and they are trying to find whether they are correct or not. That means the proficiency is less, and the rate at which the person can make use of the language is slow. Let us come to the next method called direct method. Now it's a contrast. It's a contrast to grammar teaching method, and this method actually started in the mid 19th century, and this is based on like oral media. So it's also called like oral teaching method, and this method was used for foreign language teaching, and in this method only the target language was used. That means you might notice several schools stating that, especially the English medium schools, stating that the children have to speak only in the target language, only in English. So this method popularized the use of target language in the classroom. That means the first language or the parent language will not be used. Caregiver's language will not be used there. Rather, the language to be learned will be used in the classroom. Then meanings are communicated directly, and then reading, writing skills will be taught only after speaking and understanding has occurred. Grammar in this method is illustrated through visual presentation, and then like this is an inductive approach to language teaching. The first one was deductive. Grammar teaching method was deductive. This one is inductive. So here rules will not be given. Here some presentations will be made, and then the learners would be made interested in that presentation. They would be involved in the activity, and then like vocabulary of everyday use, the most common occurring structures, some kind of a core vocabulary will be given, so that those words and sentences which have a high frequency of occurrence would be presented before the learners first, and then they would like once they have mastered that skill, then reading and writing would be introduced. But at any point of time, memorization is not part of it. Rules are not to be memorized. This is in contrast with the grammar translation method. And you'll also notice that most work will happen in the classroom. That means the learners do not have to take drills and assignments or homeworks. And if that does not happen, that means more classroom hours are required. Let me draw your attention to another very popular method, which is called audio-lingual method. And this method of foreign language or second language teaching emphasizes on teaching and speaking and listening before reading and writing, obviously. Then it uses dialogues and drills. So what happens in this method is the learners have to listen to how the native speakers, how the teachers use the language, and then they also repeat that. Sometimes a record would be played and or a video would be played, and the learners would be asked to repeat that. So they need to repeat that so that they master the pronunciation of the language. When they are able to master the pronunciation of the language, they are made to understand the context in which those sentences are used, and only then reading and writing skills are introduced. This method discourages the use of mother tongue in the classroom. Okay, this discourages the use of mother tongue in the classroom. That means the target language is to be used. And you'll notice that this method also makes use of contrastive analysis. I have already introduced before the contrastive analysis. That means the course instructor is aware of the difference between the language known to the learners and the language to be learned by the learners. And the instructor can compare the structures of both the languages, the language already known to the learner and the language being taught to the learner. So the instructor would compare the structures of both the languages, and then at times predict the kind of errors that can happen, and then try to resolve the problems. Again, this method was popular for quite some time, and especially in the US. But then there were criticisms for this method, and it was criticized, and other methods were developed slowly. Communicative language teaching method came up as a reaction to grammar translation method, and as a reaction to audio lingual method. And this method has gained a lot of prominence. This method grew because of advances in psycholinguistics, because of advances in cognitive sciences. The course instructors realized that the earlier teaching methods had several disadvantages. The learners would be under a lot of stress. In the grammar translation method, we have noticed, in the audio lingual method, we have noticed the learners are often at a lot of stress, and they need to memorize. And because of that, there's a possibility that their motivation in the language would be, in the concerned language, would be less, and that would be a kind of an impediment to learning. So the pace of learning is very slow in the earlier forms. Here it can be accelerated if the ideas of cognitive science and psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, and other things that grew in 1960s and 70s are put into use. So this communicative language teaching method grew in 1970s, and it emphasized on comprehension of the message, and it emphasized on the communicative aspects of the language, and it actually asked the instructors to revisit, to re-examine the goals of our syllabus or materials and activities of the language classrooms. And then this method became so popular that it is popular even today, and its main focus was to make the learners able to use language even if it requires teaching of no grammar at all. So this method had its focus on the ability to communicate and not the ability to use or say to memorize grammar rules. There are some other methods also which are not very popular, but they require our attention because in some way or the other we have been to that context. Let us just take into consideration a method called reading method. Now this reading method has its objective on the reading skills. Now we have so far seen that reading and writing skills are introduced at a later stage only when the learners have developed some proficiency in speaking and comprehension. Here in this reading method, the learners are presented with some small sections, and then they develop reading with understanding, and after that they are given larger text, and then they are given still larger text, and then slowly they are made to read stories and smaller simplified novels, and then thereby by reading the learners are made to acquire or learn vocabulary and usages. So it is based on the fact that a word has its own expected surrounding. So a word does not occur in isolation, rather it has other friends, and most words occur in strings. So if the learner is presented with reading comprehension passages or say stories and simplified novels, the learner would be able to not only learn a word, rather the learner would be able to see how that word is put into use. Now this appears okay to some extent, but then this method is also compared with the ability to teach recitation skills. Now the difference between reading and recitation would be recitation is the ability to spell out something. It is some kind of a just spelling out, and it is without comprehension. So I may be able to say my name is Tariq Khan, and I know Urdu and I can read Arabic. Now my reading of Arabic is restricted, it is restricted to recitation. That means I can recite Arabic, but I cannot read with comprehension. So this method has its focus on spelling out the text, and occasionally some language communities have their focus on recitation skills, and in that the correct pronunciation has more weightage than the ability to understand the language, because these communities or the intended text to be read are sacred texts, they are religious texts. Sometimes these have a lot of cultural value. So it is said that it cannot afford any mispronunciation, because mispronunciation would cause a meaning change. So there is a lot of focus on correct pronunciation in this method, and the skill that is given prime importance is reading without comprehension. That can be called recitation. And the text, like initially it would be very simple text, maybe just a word with smaller breaks, and then words, then smaller phrases, then sentences, then larger text. After that, once like the learner is able to pronounce and the learner is able to produce vocabulary, then simpler stories are given, and then further the novels are introduced. Let me draw your attention to another method called mimicry memorization method. Now, this method, which is also known as informal drill method or say conversational method, has an interesting aspect. Here the learners are asked to mimic, they are asked to reproduce, they are asked to repeat with the instructor or the native speaker. So there are like demonstrations. Obviously only that which is demonstrated can be repeated. So there are demonstrations of lessons and the learners have to repeat that. The ratio between demonstration and drill is 1:2. That means if there is say one sentence or a particular word is spoken, the learners have to produce that 2 times. This can happen either then and there, or it can happen repeatedly later on. So here the learners basically go on to mimic the speakers, mostly the native informants or say drill masters, and then in the process they are able to memorize some sentences. In the process they are able to gain mastery on sentences, and then the grammar is taught by providing model sentences. So when they are gaining these sentences, it is assumed that the sentences that they have mastered are model sentences. They are the templates based on which several other sentences can be reproduced. So once a particular style or set of sentences have reached the learners will be able to produce more and more sentences of that kind. Then there is another approach called the natural approach. This was developed by Krashen and Terrell in 1970s and 1980s. This approach is based on a very interesting thing. It is based on the way we have acquired our languages, on the way the first language develops in an individual. So the natural approach examines how the first language grows in an individual. It looks into how the human children make use of the first language and how the first language grows in them. And based on that, this method is used for teaching second language and foreign language. Now, obviously, here grammar will not be introduced. Here, there would not be stress. The focus is on ease of learning. It is a learning-centric approach, and the focus of say teaching, learning, or focus of the classroom is on communication, not the appropriate sentences or the rules. That means the learners are given the freedom to speak even ungrammatically if they are able to convey the message. So the message becomes more important than the form. Here the focus is on the communication and message and not on the form. So the learners have the freedom to use incorrect forms also for some time, and then they are like stress-free. Slowly they are able to identify the errors that they are committing, and then they are able to correct that. Before we move on to the next one, we should also notice that these are like approaches. It's not an individual method, and it is also based on the ideas that we are developing or that we are like growing in the fields of psychology, cognition, and education. So the proponents of this theory believe that the learners need to be our focus. Let me draw your attention to cognitive code approach, and this approach is an approach which also grew in 1960s. As such, there is no method that says it follows the cognitive code approach. No specific method evolved out of it, but then it believed on the fact that the language, or say language teaching learning, involves mental processes. So it's not just habit formation. It is not just gaining control on some templates. It is not gaining command on some model sentences. Rather, it is a mental process. It is some kind of training the mind to make use of a different code. So English can be a code, Malayalam is another code, and if a Malayali speaker has to learn English, the concerned speaker is basically learning a new code. That means the ability to use language by mind has to be kept in mind. And this approach also provided a lot of ideas for various other methods. So though this approach did not lead to a particular method, it gave inputs to various other methods. For instance, the communicative approach makes use of the ideas of cognitive code approach, because earlier we have seen that there is a lot of discussion on what is the goal of language teaching, what is the syllabus, and how the learners are expected to develop proficiency. I also am happy to draw your attention to another method called eclectic method, and this is a very practical method which makes use of all the good things in all the methods. So it's a term used for several methods, a kind of a mixed model in which the best of both the models, like audio lingual, grammar translation method, communicative language teaching, direct method, so all of it is brought into use here. And it's a practical method which focuses on the positive outcomes of other methods. So if grammar translation method is successful on some aspect, this method makes use of that particular aspect and then applies the successful aspects of some other methods. So here the activities would include oral practice, reading aloud, question and answer, interactions, and then some amount of translation with deductive grammar is also there. And then the learners are expected to gain proficiency without feeling a lot of stress in them. So without feeling too much of stress, they are able to gain proficiency in the language. Now we have discussed so many methods. There are several other methods which might not have become part of this discussion. I also take this opportunity to discuss some of the activities that that might help in the help the language course instructors. Drills are always there. You can have MCQs and fill up the blanks, or say practice read aloud, repetition, mimicry, all sorts of things can be helpful. Apart from that, one method that, or say one technique that helps a lot is called diary writing. So here the learners are asked to write all that they have done in the day, all that they have experienced, all kinds of thoughts or their experiences. So in the process, what happens is the learner begins and then goes on to state things that the learner has done subsequently. Here, in unconsciously or indirectly, the learner is making use of verbs in their different tenses. So step by step, the learner is making use of past tense, and the diary often completes with what the learner is going to do in the next day. Then there are like role plays. This is also an indirect method. The learners are given some roles, for instance, doctor, nurses, or say engineer or scientist or a sports person, anything of that sort. The learners are assigned some roles and then they are asked to interact among themselves. So the actual context of language use come into play, and when the learners are enacting these roles. Then learning by teaching, in this activity, what happens is the learners are asked to become teachers. So they are asked to teach, and in the process they are able to observe the rules, observe the nuances, intricacies of the language more carefully, and then they are able to gain proficiency in the language. There are several other popular methods or popular techniques like just a minute activities. You might know about that. Extempore and elocutions, debates and surveys. All these are indirect techniques in which the concerned learner has to gain mastery on not just the form but also appropriate use of those forms. Some books that can help you gain a good understanding on these matters are like Approaches and Methods in Language Teaching by Richards and Rogers. It's a very interesting book, and there is a specific dictionary called Longman Dictionary of Language Teaching and Applied Linguistics. This is also by Richards and Richard Smith. These are like things that you can look at to gain more understanding on individual language method. My view at this point is that no particular method can be said that this method is complete and this method is ultimate. You also have something called computer assisted language learning, where the corpus of a language is made into use and the most frequently occurring words would be taught first, most frequently occurring sentences would be taught first. All sorts of things are there, but so far it would be difficult to say that a particular method has is the method or is the best method. Some methods help some particular aspect, other methods help other aspects, and say a good classroom teacher, a good language course instructor would be the one who is able to pick the best of all and then develops his own or her own method for teaching the language by taking into consideration the context, the situations in which the teaching is happening, whether it's the first language or the second language or a foreign language, by also taking into consideration certain other psychological facts like the learners should not be put under stress. The learning happens best when the learners are comfortable, they are at ease, they are not stressed, and motivation plays an important role. When the learners are motivated, they are able to put in extra efforts. All these points are important to develop a good or say an inviting language classroom. At this point, I think I should take a pause and invite questions, if any, from the points that I have discussed. And I thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to discuss these issues of very high importance with you. Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
If there are any questions, you can ask.
Thank you, sir.
I thank the participants for their patience. They have been very patient, and I hope the points I have made are clear. In case I have not been very clear on some aspect, you can write to me on my email address, or you can get in touch with me. The organizers can pass on my email and contact numbers to you. We can discuss further on any of these issues.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, any questions, please?
Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me, sir? Hello.
Yes, please.
Okay. Sir, you have talked about many techniques and methods about for language teaching. Actually, we are not first or second language teachers. We are all third language teachers, especially for students for third language. But I think as a linguistic student, there is a new methodology like Lakoff and other like Foucault. They are conceptualization is the basis of the language learning. Then how can we conceptualize the things to the third language students? For the first language students we can, but what technique will be suited for the students that who are learned the mother tongue and international language, and again going to learn a regional language?
It's an interesting question. I should like to thank you for this question. The case of India is very interesting because we have some kind of natural bilinguality. We have linguistic diversity in the country, and because of that, we do not have only second language. We also have third language context when, especially in the language classrooms. So when the third language is to be taught, and that language is the language spoken in the vicinity, that means it's the language of that region, we should take into consideration some points like there is a shared vocabulary. That means the learners will have some vocabulary known to them. There would be some kind of similarities in the way words are formed in all these languages, whether first, second, or third. So there are like common patterns with respect to pronunciation, with respect to word formation, with respect to sentence construction. So these are a few things which will be helpful for the course instructor to assume that the learners would be able to receive these things at a slightly easier level. Secondly, the techniques like error analysis and contrastive analysis will play an important role here. Contrastive analysis, as I had mentioned earlier, would be helpful in the sense that the course instructor can compare the structures of the languages concerned here. Okay, the course instructor can compare the structure of the first language, the second language, and the third language, or all the languages spoken in the vicinity, and then predict some of the errors and provide solutions to those errors which are likely to happen. So that way, the rate of learning can be accelerated and the problems on part of the learners can be decreased. I hope I have been able to understand your question and answer that correctly.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll wind up the session. Over to Biresh, sir.
Namaskar. I am here to propose vote of thanks to the speaker of this session, Dr. Tariq Khan Sahib. He is the research officer and academic secretary to the director CIIL. I was here constantly listening his speech, and he has covered almost all the aspects of his topic, that is language teaching methods and techniques. In short term, he said that this all come under language pedagogy, that is teaching, learning, evaluation, and all kind of contents, methods, and purposes of language education. he has covered. And one very interesting, and I am very fond of this kind of deliberations, that difference between similar sounding terms, but a C difference is there, and a good speaker always keeps in his focus to segregate the concepts. So very nicely he has explained the difference between outcome and output. If it is desired, then it is outcome. If it is a mix of desired and undesired, it is output. So this way, in very interesting and very elaborate manner, sir, you have covered the different dimensions of your topic. I am very thankful to you on behalf of my friends and colleagues, as well as on behalf of all the participants. So thank you very much.